Okay, so today here we got a little bit of a unique situation on this walk-in freezer. Customer called and said that when they come in the morning, the temp is off a little bit. Freezer should be below 0 degrees. When they come in, it's a little high, say around 10 degrees. Throughout the day, it gets colder and it drops down to temp no problem. And then sometimes at night, it goes back up to 10 degrees. So I was thinking that it was the defrost clock. They're just seeing the defrost times are on are wrong because they had a power outage and they're just, you know, seeing it at different times than they're used to. But time clock checks out perfectly fine, no ice on the coil. The only ice was on the expansion valve, on the outlet of the expansion valve. So that tells me usually you have a leak. The refrigerant is vaporizing right out of the valve and icing up. So I came up here and do my gauges on here, and lo and behold, we don't have a leak. What we have is this unit is basically subcooling itself. It's cooling itself off too much. Basically on refrigeration systems, there are two ways to maintain head pressure in colder environments. Now the reason why they're seeing this more in the morning, not a temp in the morning, not a temp at night, is because lately around here, it's been dropping into the 20s at night, and during the day it's been anywhere between, actually today it's 50 degrees, yesterday was probably mid-30s to 40s. So as it's running during the day, that refrigerant pressure is hot enough to be able to make the unit work right, but at night the outside temperature is too cold for the unit. Now there are two ways to keep that temperature, the refrigerant pressure up. One way is by a headmaster, which is what I thought this had. Now headmaster usually sits right about here and looks like an expansion valve minus the bulb, and what that does is depending on outside temperature and pressure of the refrigerant, it'll bypass some refrigerant right out of the discharge line and bypass it through the and not send it through the condenser coil so that it doesn't draw too much heat out of it. Well, I thought it was that because on those units, this fan motor runs all the time. So that's why I thought it was. But then I got to looking, and this has the second option, which is a head pressure control, which is a control that actually physically senses the pressure of the refrigerant and turns this fan on and off accordingly. Now that, in this case, is this little guy on the line right here, and that's not working. Right now, like I said, it's probably in the 50s. This pressure, this is 404, this pressure is too low. This head pressure is too low. This should be anywhere, operating temperature, say 275 or so. On a day like today, I wouldn't be sad with 200, 225. But this is below 150, what is that? It's 25, 35, 140 on these gauges. I don't use the 410A gauges for refrigeration, so that's why if you look at these gauges, the numbers are a lot smaller. The suction pressure here is a little low, but that's partially because the head pressure is low because the temperatures the pressures kind of correspond to each other. Plus, it is 0 degrees in the box, so we are down to temp. So basically this control is bad. It's not cycling the fan like it should, so we have to replace that. Now I have one here which is partially made up already just because it's been raining out. I didn't want to get caught in the rain. And what we have here is just an adjustable one that I can set. And now we have to put this in the line. Now here's the problem. This is on the discharge line of the compressor here. So you can't pump the unit down to get the refrigerant out to take these off. Now sometimes there is a Schrader behind these, but I've been burnt too much to try to play with that. I've taken these off and there's been no Schrader behind there. I've taken these off and the Schrader's been leaking behind there. I've taken those off and I've actually snapped this little braze joint here. Because all these are brazed into the line. I'll get you a kind of a close-up of that real quick here. You can see what I'm talking about. You can see they're just brazed right into the line. Now I've snapped these off before. I've had there be no Schrader behind there, and I've had the Schraders behind there leak. So what I'm going to do here, first of all, we're going to shut this off. And where I'm going to hook it up to be able to sense the pressure is right off of the king valve here. So what I have is you can see, this is how they come with the cap tube and the 1/4-inch flare nut. I have a T here. Now with these T's, you can put Schraders in both sides, you can put Schraders in one side. and that's what I have here. This port is open, this side has a Schrader. So what I can do is, this is back seated now. I can take this nut off, pop it right in place, and then crack this valve, and that'll give me a reading into the liquid line. I have another port down here where I have my gauges hooked up, but I'll also have another Schrader on the other side I can hook my gauges into right here. Now, I know a lot of you are saying that king valves leak and the stems on them leak, and they do leak, but when you put the cap on, this, I don't know what the hell I just did with the cap, I had it a second ago, but when you put the cap on, if you put some leak lock on it, that'll seal it pretty good. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to make sure that one of these is a high pressure limit, the other one's a fan cycle control. I'm almost positive fan cycle control is that yellow wire, but we're just going to make sure. So here's my fan wire that I'm pulling right now. That's hooked into the bottom of the contactor, and the other one, which is that white wire, is hooked into the yellow wire. So that is the right wire there. Just trying to sneak over here. So we can just cut these, and now we just leave that. It's already sealed. We don't have to do anything to that. We can just leave it in place. I'm going to reach across the block the camera for a second. My head gets in the way here, so grabbing some tools. I always forget that these have cutters on the very tip of them. Now all this is a switch that's controlled on pressure. So these two wires, doesn't matter what screw they go to or anything. Just get them in place. They always give you a ton of room in these. Okay, so that's electrically connected. So we can just pop this front cover in place. Tighten this down now. Let me zoom in a little bit here. You can see the pressures on there. All Renko pressure controls are a little bit different. You can see one column here. This one says high event, and this one here says differential, D-I-F-F. Okay, high event is the setting that this switch will close. Differential, now you want to know what pressure that this kicks out at. Well, you have to take your high vent, whatever that is set up as, and subtract your differential, and that's the pressure that this will cut out at. So right now, using these pointers, I have it set at about to kick on at 275 and cut out at 2 1/4. Now, why did I choose those? If you look at the gauges here, if I can get them in frame, refrigeration condensing temperature usually want 110 degrees, which is this. If you look at this orange outside line, 110 degrees corresponds to 225 psi. So 275 psi rather. So that's why we had that, and I like to keep it no lower than 2 1/4. Actually around 2 1/4, no lower than 200. And the controls themselves, those little tabs, are not necessarily the most accurate thing in the world, but at least this gives us a starting point. Now I just got to mount this to the base and hook it up to the refrigeration line. Now these T's, when you get them on the inside here, you can see that's a little depressor for a Schrader pin if you were to put this on a Schradered port. Now we're not, so that's got to come out. You can just use a pair of needle nose and they pop right out. So let's put this in a place that we can read it without blocking that low pressure control there. Which I just dropped my stake-ons a little bit in place. Well, somewhere around there, let me get a couple self-tappers. Going nowhere. Now, as gently as we can without putting any kinks into this, we're going to feed it up to the king valve, and I like to keep a couple of loops in there just to give it a little bit of a spring. You just want to make sure that you don't have any of these loops touching each other or touching anything that's going to rub out against it. I'm going to switch positions here. This is far enough in that we're not touching the cover when it comes down. We're further in than the coil bend, so we got plenty of room. Actually, we're further in than the entire receiver here. So. Put the cap on real quick just so I don't mung up any of the threads. Let me zoom in here a little bit. I'm going to give it a little bit of an angle so I can get my hand in there to put on the gauge on that port if I need to. Snug her down. I'll double check all these joints with some bubbles after I'm done. And now you can just crack that valve. quarter to a half a turn is all it takes. Now the cap that goes on there, I'm going to make sure I seal some leak lock. Because these things tend to like to leak a little bit, but the leak lock will definitely seal it. Or at least in my experience it will. And we're not leaking on that because there's no oil inside this cap. There we go. Alright, so that pressure control is in place. Let me back you up here. We're wired in. And now we have to test and see if it goes, if that fan motor turns on at the pressure we want, which we have it set at 275. So we'll see how it goes. Actually, first of all, let me just, the extra wire I'm going to tuck into this electrical panel in here. Pop the cover on. Contactor. Stay-ons. Okay, so can you see this good? Let me bring you over here a little bit. So you get a good shot of the motor. You can see I got a little bit of a spring in that. I'm not touching anything, not rubbing up against anything. So now, like I said, we're going to test this. So I'm going to see. It's kind of hard to see and do this at the same time here. Actually, you know what? I'm standing right in a puddle too, which doesn't help. And I didn't tighten that Romex connector on the bottom. I'll do now. Alright, so let's see an easy way to do this. Give me a second. Okay, hopefully you can see the gauges and the fan motor at the same time. So we're going to turn it on. Compressor's on. Pressure's going up. There's 150. 175. 200. 2 1/4. 250. All right, we hit it at 250. Let's see if it cuts out at 200. This compressor just froze up like that because the fans aren't on downstairs. All right, we cut out below 200, so we got to adjust that. That was all the, it's kind of like liquid, a little bit of liquid coming back to the compressor. You kind of get this on the first startup usually when the fans aren't running. The fans have a delay on them, so that's why that is. You can see it's melting now. That was from the fans being off downstairs. They're definitely running now. So we want to kick this up a little bit. See how much we change it. Before we kicked on right at 250. So there's 250. Now on a really cold day, it's completely possible. Alright, so now we went up to 215, so we'll give it a little bit more of a crank, and that should be pretty close. So we just kicked off at 200 there. I know I'm wiggling the camera, I'm trying to turn a screwdriver and hold this up for you guys at the same time, so I apologize for that. I can see the compressor's clear of all the ice now. Or the frost, rather. So there's 250. There's where we kicked on before. Alright, 270, that's perfectly fine for me. And we kick out at 215. So that's a good swing for me. Some people prefer different settings on these, to be honest with you. The main thing, like I said, I don't like seeing it go below 200. And that should take care of their issue. So right now, actually on this roof, I have two new Tranes that I want to show you guys that are different than the other Tranes, and they're kind of a pain in the ass. So we'll let this run. We'll double check the pressure down there, the temperature downstairs. We'll bubble check our joint here and make sure we're tight. Oh, one thing I do want to say is if you get gauges, get low loss fittings on there. So what you do is you take off, when you're done, you take off the high side here. So my high side port, you heard no refrigerant piss out of there. That's because it's all contained in this hose. You can still see I have pressure in here. So then you make sure that your center gauge here is tight here, and then that this isn't hooked up to anything. And then open the high side gauge, and then crack the low, and you can suck all that refrigerant back into the system so you're not losing anything. Alright, so I'm just going to pull my gauges off here, button this up, and then we'll take a peek at those rooftops. Okay, we got two Tranes up here. This one's a 2010. That one is either 2013 or 2014. Both 410A, but we're going to see the difference between these, and we're also going to look at a difference between these and a normal unit. Number one, take a look at the blower. Well, I don't know if you can see the blower in there. See how it's sitting sideways? I'll take a look at what this thing looks like. Look at that. That's the blower. And that's the motor. Direct drive. I don't ever want to see one of these things break, because how in the holy hell are you going to replace that? That's a nightmare is what that is. These look like an exhaust fan, but they suck air in this way and blow it down. And this is the heat exchanger. This has a regular draft motor, unlike that one you saw in my other video. Now here's the stupid part. Okay, so let's look at the way this works. Here's the three-phase coming in, right, to your motor. But then you have this. Well, what the hell is this? This is a variable speed motor. This is a little potentiometer that you can adjust to adjust the speed of the motor. So this kind of works like one of those, not a phase converter. Jesus, I have one at my house. I'll think of the name of it and I'll put it up here. Basically it turns a three-phase motor into a variable speed motor. It's kind of how this works. Now, you see this tiny little board? These things blow out all the time. You can see the rust on there actually. This wall gets super, super cold because the air is blown across it and it's not really insulated. So all the water gets into this board and shorts it out and screws up the blower all the time. I've replaced this probably maybe like 3 times. So this is that unit. That's the way that this unit's is worked. Also, this is 410A, but as you can tell, maybe here we have just a regular coil, which is perfectly fine. So now let's take a wander over to the newer unit here, and we'll see how they changed. Now it's the same size unit, and one of the major things that they changed, microchannel coil. So instead of having 3/8 copper tube, you have these little, this is your actual refrigerant passages here. Now, I don't trust those at all, especially on this. You'll see the way it's set up as I take this off here. Okay, there's your microchannel coil. Now you can see how they're all connected. Look at this. Now this looks like, I mean, to me at least, it looks like aluminum. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And that's where your all your refrigerant goes to. Now this is a 410A, so this sucker's under some serious pressure. Once this crap starts oxidizing, I can almost guarantee you you're going to be popping these units like you wouldn't believe. Especially in New England. I just have a feeling that that's going to be trouble. Now, funny side note, this here is a phase monitor. Now all this does is monitor the phases. If you lose one phase to your unit, this will shut your unit down. Also, this will prevent you from running your units backwards. Now this has no load on it. All this is the same way the meter in your house works, is it just samples the 3-phase coming in off the top of this contactor, this main contactor here. That's all it does, right? So I went to a job, brand new building, brand new unit. They had put it in the winter, so they had never used that cooling. Now the cooling doesn't work, okay? So I go there, and what the electrician who wired it did is they hooked up the unit and ran it, turned it on, and it wouldn't turn on because the phases here were reversed, so that this sensor wouldn't allow the unit to run. So what did they do? Well, instead of changing the phases here, your main phases coming in, they just took the sample wires here and just reversed those. So that made this control think that the phasing was correct when it wasn't, and it ran these scroll compressors backward and baked both of them. And replaced both compressors in that unit. That was a little bit of a whoops. Alright, so now for the differences, we got the same blower as the other one does, but we got a little bit more of a different control scheme going on. You can see they changed their board to this one here. Now this controls a bunch of stuff. I believe this also controls your economizer too. Instead of having your economizer control in here, it's controlled here. And that thing is squeaking and annoying the living crap out of me. And it's not mine, so I ain't fixing it. So we have a bunch of different potentiometers here, and those adjust the fan speed. They also adjust, like I said, your economizers too, your economizer dampers, which flop out the back. But that's kind of a different, what year is this? 2012, so there's a 2-year difference between them. Between this one here and that one there. Alright, that's pretty much it for this job. I just figured I'd show you some different newer units. You know, you see me working on the older stuff. We also got a Lennox GCS unit on the end of this roof here too. So I figured you'd enjoy a quick peek at these. So hope you guys like this video, and when we get another interesting job, you'll get another one.